She followed every rule. She was kind when they hurt her. She was strong when no one offered a shoulder to lean on. She did the right thing when everything around her was chaos. She smiled in family photos while something inside her was screaming. She took care of others while her own heart bled in silence. She kept the house clean while her soul gathered dust in corners no one visited. And yet, in the end, there was nothing left of her. Do you know this woman? Maybe she lives on your street. Maybe she works beside you. Maybe you see her face in the mirror every morning. She's the woman everyone admires for handling it all. The woman nobody imagines is crying in secret in the bathroom between one task and another. The woman who carries the weight of the world on her shoulders. Yet no one asks if her knees are buckling under the pressure. It's a simple story. It doesn't have major tragedies. There are no obvious villains, no dramatic moments that would make headlines. It's just about an ordinary woman who slowly disappeared within her own life, so gradually that nobody noticed, not even her. But maybe it speaks to that quiet pain you carry, the one no one has seen because you've hidden it too well, the one you yourself stopped acknowledging because looking at it would require an honesty that might break the fragile structure keeping everything going. If this story keeps you company in the dead of night, when the silence feels heavy and you wonder where that version of yourself went, the one who dreamed, who longed, who burned with inner fire, let me continue. This is not a story of spectacular transformation. I don't promise magic solutions or dramatic twists. It's just recognition, witness, a mirror. Subscribe to the channel, but only if it's in your own time, only if something here resonates with you, only if some part of this story touches that wound you've learned to ignore so effectively that sometimes you forget it's even there. She learned early on, a woman needs to be useful, a woman needs to serve, a woman needs to be tolerable. In childhood, while other kids played loudly, she was already noticing the approving looks when she stayed quiet, when she didn't bother anyone, when she solved her own problems without calling an adult. What a sensible girl, they'd say. Such a calm child. And she drank in that approval like someone dying of thirst. She noticed, still very young, how her mother twisted herself into 1,000 pieces to please her father, how her mother's exhaustion was ignored, how her mother's needs always came last. That's just how it is, her grandmother would say when she caught her watching. Women were born to take care of things, and that knowledge settled into her as an absolute truth, undeniable, as natural as breathing. In her teenage years, she saw how difficult girls got rejected, how those who showed anger or frustration were called dramatic, how girls who set boundaries were labeled complicated. And she decided, without really deciding consciously, that she would be the easy girl, not sexually, but existentially. The one who doesn't complicate things, who doesn't make a fuss, who smiles and agrees and smooths the way. And that's how, as an adult, she became a master at disappearing while being present. She learned to smile when the world was collapsing around her. She smiled at birthday parties she didn't want to attend. She smiled at tense family gatherings. She smiled at devastating news. She smiled when she heard comments that belittled her, a smile that never reached her eyes. Yet nobody noticed, because nobody really looked. She learned to serve coffee with trembling hands, coffee for inconvenient visitors who showed up unannounced, coffee for the husband who never asked about her day, coffee for the mother-in-law who always found something to criticize in her home, coffee for the boss who piled work on her after hours. Her hands shook, but the cup never spilled. She'd become an expert at stopping herself from overflowing. She knew how to be pleasant, even when her body begged for rest. She knew how to calm other people's crises while swallowing her own. She knew how to create peace for everyone else, while a storm raged in her soul. She remembered all the birthdays, All the appointments, all the little details that made others feel seen, valued, important. She carried in her mind a complex calendar, birth dates, wedding anniversaries, dates of death, doctor's appointments for her kids, her husband, her parents, school meetings, work deadlines, both hers and often the ones her colleagues forgot. She knew who was allergic to what, who was fighting with whom, who needed a phone call that particular week. How do you manage to remember all of that? People would ask, impressed. She'd shrug, as if it was simple, natural, as if her brain weren't constantly overloaded, processing information, anticipating needs, predicting crises, planning solutions before the problems even fully appeared. As if she didn't wake up in the middle of the night, panicked, remembering something she almost forgot. As if she didn't keep countless lists, alarms, reminders, elaborate systems so she wouldn't fail. Because failing at any of these invisible tasks meant failing as a woman, as a mother, as a wife, as a daughter, as a friend, as a human. But nobody remembered she also got tired. Nobody wrote on their calendars the day she'd need a kind word. Nobody monitored her exhaustion level to offer a break before she collapsed. Nobody noticed when her smile became more strained, when her answers got shorter, when the light in her eyes dimmed. No one realized she had limits too, that her body was sending increasingly desperate signals. Migraines that lasted for days, skin flare-ups, chronic insomnia, unexplained muscle pain. It's probably stress, doctors would say, prescribing yet another painkiller, another sedative, another sleeping pill. As if stress was something temporary and not her permanent state of being. No one saw that she was human too. That behind the efficiency was a person with unmet desires, unspoken fears, dreams abandoned so gradually that even she couldn't pinpoint the moment she stopped believing she deserved anything more than functionality. She did everything right, everything. She woke up too early, before the sun rose, to make breakfast nobody really appreciated, to get a head start on cleaning nobody noticed, to organize a day that always had more demands than hours. But each success came with a silent loss, a piece of her identity, her will, her voice, as if every yes to the world were a no to herself. Every time she said, "It's okay, I'll handle it," for someone else's problem, she was telling herself, "You don't matter." Every time she swallowed words to avoid conflict, she swallowed a bit of her voice, her truth, her presence. It was a cruel math she'd internalized so completely she never questioned it. An unbalanced equation where her worth was directly tied to her usefulness, her availability, her ability to erase herself so others could fully exist. "You're an angel," they'd say. "I don't know what we'd do without you. How can you handle everything?" And these words, which were meant to sound like praise, felt like chains. Because they weren't really recognition of her, the complex, multifaceted person she was, or could have been. They recognized the function she performed, the role she filled, the usefulness she provided, and with each compliment, the unspoken contract was renewed. Keep being indispensable, keep being efficient, keep being available, keep being everything for everyone, keep being nothing for yourself. Have you ever felt you were carrying more than you can handle? Not just physical weight, though there's that too. Shopping bags, kids' backpacks, luggage nobody offers to carry, but mainly the invisible load, the weight of expectations, the weight of unshared worries, the weight of decisions nobody else wants to make, the weight of feelings that have nowhere to go because nobody offers a strong enough shoulder for the one who's always been everyone else's shoulder. Have you ever felt your body was present, going through the motions, smiling at the right moments, saying the expected words, but your soul was absent, like something essential had disconnected and was floating somewhere far away, watching that efficient woman everyone admires, wondering who she really is, what she really wants, what would truly make her feel alive again. Leave a comment below, not for me, for another woman who might be reading the comments, feeling profoundly alone in her experience. Maybe your words are exactly what she needs to read today. Maybe your testimony is the mirror in which she finally recognizes herself. Sometimes your story becomes a mirror for someone who hasn't found the words for their own pain. And in that mutual, silent recognition, a kind of healing arises that no advice or practical solution can offer. The healing of knowing you are not alone, that you're not crazy, that your experience, though rarely named, is real and shared. She cancelled herself in the name of peace, peace for others. She served hot coffee at the right time, cooked food that others enjoyed, even when her own stomach rejected it, listened to the same stories repeated, always feigning interest, stored away her own hurts in drawers that she never opened. She gave of herself out of fear of being forgotten, as if her existence only mattered as long as she was useful, fear of being seen as difficult, as if having needs was a luxury she didn't deserve, fear of being inadequate, as if she had to make up for some invisible flaw she'd carried since birth. "I'm fine," she'd say when asked, with a calm face, polite smile, perfect posture, but her eyes bore the accumulated fatigue of sleepless nights and abandoned dreams, of swallowed tears and stifled screams. No one saw that exhaustion, because people who do everything right don't cause trouble, don't bother anyone, don't bleed in public. They just fade away gradually, like paint fading in the sun. One day you look and notice, the color is gone, but no one saw the gradual transformation. If you've ever smiled while your heart was screaming, hit like. This isn't about the algorithm. It's about mutual recognition. It's understanding in the silence. She kept this up for years, maybe decades, silently keeping invisible receipts. I did this for you. I gave that up for you. I swallowed that hurt for you. Receipts she never cashed in, but that weighed more and more on her, the body, that honest traitor. While her mind rationalized, it's normal to be tired, everyone is. I shouldn't complain. There are people in way worse situations. This will pass, it's just a phase. And her voice said everything was okay. Her body recorded it all. A faithful log of unspoken truths, unprocessed emotions, overstepped limits. The tension in her shoulders that turned to solid knots under the skin, impossible to loosen even with professional massages. As though she was carrying not just daily responsibilities, but the accumulated weight of years of unmet expectations, silent battles, forced resignation. Her jaw clenched, locked even during sleep, wearing down the enamel on her teeth, causing headaches that radiated through her skull. Her physical self expressing what her voice couldn't: anger, frustration, words swallowed that turned into pure muscular tension. Her stomach no longer digested properly, reacting with heartburn, reflux, vague pains that no medication fully resolved. As if she could no longer process more lies, more broken promises, more indigestible situations she forced down in the name of family harmony. Her skin reacting to everything: mysterious allergies, eczema flare-ups under extreme stress, unexplained blemishes, doctors vaguely attributed to emotional factors. The skin, that boundary between inner and outer, crying out what her mouth refused to say. This is hurting me. This is causing me harm. This isn't healthy. Her sleep was never deep or restorative. Nights awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying worries, or sleep interrupted by sudden jolts, nightmares, anxiety attacks that woke her with a racing heart, labored breathing, her entire body on high alert even when there was no real immediate danger, her body in a constant state of war, unable to lower its guard, to enter the deep relaxation needed for true recovery. No amount of rest relieved her fatigue. It wasn't just physical tiredness solved by a good night's sleep. It was cellular, existential exhaustion. Exhaustion from doing too much, sure, but mostly from not doing what her soul truly needed, from living perpetually out of sync with her deepest values, most essential needs, most genuine desires. She stored in her flesh what she couldn't express in words. Her body was a living archive of big and small traumas, subtle violations, continuous denials, a battlefield for conflicts she refused to consciously acknowledge. She woke up with pains no doctor could explain, wandering pains that moved from place to place. One day in her knees, the next in her back, then her head, then her chest. Pains that seemed to have their own life and personality, almost like entities inhabiting her body, constantly reminding her of the cost of her self-erasure. It's probably emotional, doctors would say after inconclusive tests, ineffective treatments, vague diagnoses. A phrase she had learned to hate, not necessarily because it was false, but because of the dismissive tone with which it was usually said, as if emotional pain was less real, less serious, less deserving of attention and care than pain with an identifiable physical cause, as though body and mind were separate entities, instead of one system desperately trying to communicate an imbalance, as though emotions had no tangible biochemical manifestations, no real effects on organs, tissues, entire systems, as though chronic stress didn't raise cortisol levels, inflame joints, compromise immunity, disrupt gut flora, and interfere with every aspect of human physiology. And so she learned to distrust her own experience, to doubt the legitimacy of her pain, to minimize her symptoms, to keep functioning even when every fiber of her being begged for a break, for attention, for real care, not just temporary band-aids that allowed her to keep producing, serving, existing for others. Sometimes in the shower, she'd cry. It was the only place she could truly be vulnerable, where the warm water softened not just her tense muscles, but also the careful defenses she'd built up, where the shower's noise masked her sobs, where nobody interrupted her with more demands, more needs, more expectations. A shower, a daily routine that for many is just about hygiene, had become for her a makeshift therapy, confession booth, refuge. Sometimes she stretched that moment beyond reason, knowing she was wasting water, that she was delaying the family routine, leaving tasks undone. But she couldn't give up that one single space that was truly hers. That's where, under the warm water, she allowed the tears to flow. Tears of exhaustion, tears of frustration, tears of anger, tears of mourning for versions of herself that never had a chance to flourish. Tears with no specific name, just the overflow of emotions kept down for too long. That was the only water that could blend with her tears, leaving no trace. The shower water washed away the salt from her cheeks, the redness in her eyes, the signs of a fragility she couldn't let the world see. Because strong women don't cry, right? Resilient women keep going. Mature women handle their problems without making a scene. Then she'd come out with her face washed and put the smile back on, as if reapplying lipstick, a gesture she'd practiced thousands of times. Compose her expression, straighten her posture, take a deep breath, and go on being who everyone expects her to be. Sometimes, looking at herself in the mirror still fogged by steam, She hardly recognized the woman staring back. Who was that person with dull eyes and a forced smile? What happened to the girl who dreamed, who had passions, who believed life would be a great adventure? Exactly when had she turned into this efficient shadow, this functional ghost inhabiting her life without truly living it? She started believing that this was just the price of adulthood, that everyone felt like this, empty, disconnected, just going through the motions, that it was normal to feel like you're playing a part, living a life that didn't really seem like your own. She looked at other women, co-workers, other mums at school, distant friends on social media, and saw the same tired expressions disguised under makeup, the same smiles that never reached their eyes, the same superficial conversations that never got to the truth. We're all exhausted, we're all faking it, we're all disappearing. And she thought that must just be a woman's fate, the price of being female in a world that demands constant performance, unreachable perfection, total self-denial. That this perpetual exhaustion, disconnection, and feeling of inadequacy was just part of the package of adult womanhood, especially for those trying to juggle family, career, relationships, appearance, home, health, all these impossible balls you're expected to keep in the air without dropping any. That it was normal to constantly feel like you're drowning in shallow waters, where technically you should be able to stand, where everyone else seems to float effortlessly while you thrash about, using every ounce of energy just to keep your face above water, smiling like you're enjoying a beach day rather than fighting for your life. Shallow water, but turbulent. Water that appears calm on the surface, but hides treacherous currents below. Water where no one seems to notice you're slowly drowning, silently struggling, getting ever more tired. Until one day, someone said, "You complain too much for someone who has it all." It was an offhand comment, seemingly harmless, spoken casually between sips of coffee one morning when she allowed a small complaint to slip out. Nothing dramatic, just a tired sigh, a mention of a sleepless night, of her aching back, of the particularly stressful week ahead. She doesn't even remember who said it exactly. Maybe her husband, distracted on his phone as she made breakfast for everyone. Maybe her mum, during their usual Sunday phone call. Maybe a colleague at work, in the break between meetings. Maybe a friend, the kind who only shares perfect, curated moments on social media. It doesn't matter who. What matters is what was said, and how those seemingly trivial words hit something deep inside her. You complain too much for someone who has it all. The comment was tossed out like someone mentioning the weather or a random piece of news. A trivial observation, almost automatic, with no obvious malice. Maybe it wasn't intended to hurt. Maybe just a cliche people say when they don't really want to listen, when they'd rather silence discomfort, when they choose comforting small talk over diving into the complexities of someone else's life. Spoken with the unconscious cruelty of someone who's never bothered to look below the surface. Someone who only sees a tidy house, never the hours of invisible work behind it. Someone who sees dinner on the table, not the planning, shopping, cooking, cleaning that made it possible. Someone who sees the functioning woman, not the human cost of that constant functionality. You complain too much for someone who has it all. All? What did she actually have? A house that consumed her time and energy to maintain. A job that consistently undervalued her. Relationships where she gave far more than she received. A worn-out body doctors dismissed. A mind always occupied with everyone else's needs. An identity built entirely around her usefulness to others. Sure, she had food on the table and a roof over her head. No major tragedies. Material privileges many people don't have, and for which she tried to be genuinely grateful. But she also had a growing emptiness, a fatigue that reached into her bones. a loneliness that paradoxically grew stronger around the very people who were supposed to be closest, but never truly saw her. In that trivial moment, she didn't scream, she didn't argue, she didn't defend her pain, her exhaustion, her experience. She didn't try to explain the complexity of feeling both privileged and worn out, of recognizing her relative luck while also acknowledging her legitimate suffering, of holding multiple contradictory truths at once, as women often must. She just smiled faintly, nodded, and maybe changed the subject, continued serving coffee, or signing documents, or listening to someone else's problems. She kept on functioning, as always, but something inside her shifted. She realized simply, nobody notices the cost of being functional. Nobody sees the effort when it's constant, when there's no contrast, no before and after, just an endless during. How do you notice the noise of a machine that never turns off? How do you sense the presence of something that never leaves? How do you value what's given freely, constantly, without negotiation or conditions? Nobody notices the effort when it's constant, when each day is a marathon disguised as a casual stroll, when every finished task is immediately replaced by 3 new ones, when there is no finish line, only more miles to cover, more mountains to climb, more burdens to carry. Nobody sees the weight when you never let it drop, when you carry it so skillfully that it looks easy, when you adapt your posture, your stride, your breathing, so that the load becomes part of you, inseparable from your very structure. And in that silence, she broke inside. It was a silent fracture. No sound of shattering glass, no screams or dramatic sobs, no slammed doors or objects hurled against walls, just an internal collapse, inaudible to the world. The kind that doesn't make noise, doesn't bleed, doesn't draw attention. A clean break, almost surgical, between who she was and who she pretended to be, between her real needs and her daily actions, between her authentic voice and the words that actually left her mouth. It was as if something fundamental had snapped. Not dramatically, like a rubber band that's stretched too far and suddenly snaps back, hitting anyone nearby, but like a support beam slowly giving way under constant pressure, quietly undermining the integrity of the whole structure until, one day, without warning, the floor just isn't there anymore to hold you up. Of course, no one noticed. She continued to function, to smile, to take care of things, organize, solve problems. Outwardly, everything looked the same. Same routine, same responsibilities, same words, same gestures. But inside, something had changed forever. The fracture had altered her inner landscape, creating a before and after invisible to others, but deeply real to her, like an earthquake reshaping the terrain, forming mountains where there once were plains, dropping chasms where there once were gentle hills. A change that could never be undone. That forced her to inhabit her life differently, to navigate an internal territory she no longer recognized, to learn the language of her own being all over again. It was a silent fracture, but one that forever changed the structure of who she was. If this part reminded you of someone, share it with them, not as an accusation or a demand, not to make them feel guilty or defensive, but as an invitation to look beneath the surface, to realize that behind someone's constant functionality might lie unspoken exhaustion, that behind a reliable smile might be a deep pain longing to be acknowledged. Sometimes a simple gesture like this, simply acknowledging you see someone's invisible struggle, can crack open a door to being heard in a world that's too noisy. It creates a small, safe space where hard truths can finally find a voice, where masks can briefly come off, where genuine connection can start to grow. That week, after the invisible fracture, She dreamed of a house, not just any dream. It had that particular quality some dreams have, more vivid than reality, more real than waking life, loaded with meaning that goes beyond the surface story, speaking directly to the unconscious in its own symbolic language of images and emotions. It was a beautiful house from the outside, nothing too grand or showy, but attractive and well kept. The kind of house neighbors speak well of, that impresses anyone passing by. An impeccable paint job, no peeling, no bubbles, not a speck of wear. A tidy yard, trimmed lawn, just enough flowers so it looked cared for without appearing vain. Clean windows that reflected the sunlight, shining like watchful eyes. Windows that let in the light, but didn't really reveal anything inside. Windows functioning more as mirrors, reflecting the outside world back at onlookers, protecting whatever was within from prying eyes. A house that seemed to say, everything's in order here, nothing to worry about, nothing to question, just admire the facade and carry on. But when she went inside, because in the dream she knew it was her house, she had the key. She belonged there even if she didn't fully recognize it. The scene changed completely. All the furniture was covered with white sheets, like houses sealed up for long absences, or those haunted mansion movies where everything is draped to shield it from dust over time, preserved for a future that might never come. Familiar shapes turned ghostly under white cloths, a couch under a white sheet, like a sleeping creature, a dining table with chairs like a Last Supper frozen in time. A piano, maybe, or a desk. It was hard to tell beneath the shroud of white that erased details, individuality, and history. Everything was clean, impeccably so. Not a speck of dust, no fingerprints, not a single cobweb, like someone spent hours each day keeping that place spotless. Even though there was no life there, no apparent purpose beyond maintaining the facade, everything was orderly. Each object in its designated place, each piece precisely positioned like a magazine photo shoot. Nothing was out of place, nothing suggesting recent use, nothing indicating the regular presence of real human beings. Messy, chaotic, unpredictable. Everything was dead. No warmth, no special energy that living spaces usually have, no smell of freshly cooked meals, no faint music in the background, no murmur of voices, no floor creaks under familiar footsteps, no trace of life, no open book lying on a table, left mid-read, no half-empty cup, still warm, no blanket tossed on the couch, shaped by someone who just left, no shoes carelessly left in the hallway, no coat slung over the back of a chair, no note on the fridge, no plants needing water, no pet curled up in its favorite spot, just sterile perfection, order without purpose, beauty without joy. She walked through the empty rooms, her steps echoing in a way that made her feel small and lost. Each door she opened revealed the same thing: perfection without purpose, order without life. And as she walked, she heard a voice that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Everything's in its place, except you. She woke up with her face wet. She wasn't sure if it was tears in her sleep or just sweat, but she knew that dream was more than just a dream. It was a message from that part of her that still knew how to speak, that part she hadn't silenced. If you've ever had a dream that felt more real than life, maybe it was your soul trying to reach you through symbols. Sometimes it's the unconscious calling us back home when we're too lost in other people's worlds. She spent days thinking about that house, the dead beauty, the emptiness filling every room. That house is me, she finally thought. I'm that house. Functional on the outside, appealing, worthy of approval, empty inside, way too tidy, no sign of her own life. This realization didn't arrive as a grand epiphany. There was no dramatic soundtrack or instant change. It was just a quiet recognition, like finally naming a pain that's been part of you so long it feels normal. That morning, she did something tiny, almost insignificant to outside eyes. She left a dirty cup in the sink, just one cup, with lipstick on the rim and leftover coffee at the bottom. She looked at that small act of rebellion and felt something unfamiliar in her chest. Fear, guilt. No, it was something else. A small spark of existence. As if that dirty cup was the first real sign she occupied that space. That she wasn't just an efficient ghost, but a real, flawed, present human being. The next day, she didn't answer a phone call. She let it ring while she took a shower, enjoying the hot water at her own pace, without guilt, without thinking about who might need her. Later that week, she said no to a request. No elaborate justifications, no rehearsed excuses, just no. And she survived it. Small acts of presence, small permissions, small liberations. She began to notice the patterns that imprisoned her, how she'd automatically say yes, even before fully processing what was asked, how she always placed others' needs ahead of her own, how she tied her worth to her usefulness. Old patterns rooted in childhood when she learned love was conditional on her performance, when she realized noisy kids were seen as inconvenient, when she saw that she was more accepted if she made adults' lives easier. She still carried that frightened little girl inside, the one who learned to be small to feel loved, to be useful to be noticed, to stay silent to be accepted. Now, little by little, she was listening to that child, acknowledging her fears, honoring her needs. It wasn't easy. The old pattern resurfaced with force whenever she felt stressed or unsafe. Guilt would appear like an unwelcome frequent guest. She often still felt undeserving of taking care of herself, but she started creating a small space between stimulus and response, between someone else's request and her automatic yes, between someone else's need and her own abandonment. In that small space, she began to listen to herself, to check in with her tired body, to ask her soul what it really wanted. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, she chose herself. She didn't become a different person overnight. There was no radical transformation. She didn't ditch everything and everyone to live her truth in some exotic location. She still gave, she still cared, she still served. But now, slowly, she started including herself in the list of people worthy of her care. She began to notice when her body asked for rest, when her mind needed silence, when her soul craved beauty. She learned to say no without drowning in guilt. She learned to go to bed without answering every message, to sometimes leave the dishes in the sink as tangible proof she existed, that she took up space, that she had needs. She learned to see the difference between true generosity and self-mutilation, disguised as altruism, between loving others and fearing abandonment. Above all, she learned to listen to that small voice inside, the one she'd silenced with should and must and I can't fail. That voice began to whisper again, softly at first, testing if it was safe to speak, then more steadily, like a friend who's returned after a long absence. She started feeling hunger again, not just physical hunger, which she'd never truly noticed, eating mechanically while doing other things, but a hunger for life, experiences, sensations. She began noticing colors, textures, scents, as if her senses were waking up after a long numbness. She paused to watch the sky, to feel the wind, to listen to the birds. Small moments of presence that before seemed like inadmissible luxuries in her constantly efficient life. And she noticed something curious. The more she allowed herself to exist, the more the people around her seemed genuinely interested in her real existence, not just her function. Some drifted away, it's true. Those who only wanted the convenient, always available version of her. Those who loved her usefulness rather than her humanity. But others, fewer, yet more meaningful, started truly seeing her, asking how she was, and waiting for a real answer, offering help without expecting anything in return, making room for her voice, her presence, her needs, as if by giving herself permission to exist fully, she also gave others permission to see her completely. She began meeting other women like her, women carrying invisible loads, keeping entire structures afloat on their shoulders without recognition, confusing love with self-sacrifice. In these conversations, these encounters of tired souls, she realized she wasn't alone, that her pain wasn't unique, and her exhaustion wasn't weakness. It was just the natural result of carrying too much, for too long, without enough support. She discovered her story was part of a bigger story, a cultural pattern teaching women to be everything for everyone and nothing for themselves, that rewards self-erasure and punishes self-care. That understanding didn't erase her pain entirely, but it provided context, gave it a name, offered her a community. One afternoon, just an ordinary afternoon, while watching the rain through the window, holding a cup of tea in her hands, letting herself be still without guilt, she reached a simple realization. She wasn't cured. Maybe she never would be, fully. Old patterns still showed up. Guilt still knocked on the door. Weariness was still a familiar presence. But now there was something new. Awareness. And with that awareness came the possibility of choice. She could choose when to give and when to hold back, when to serve and when to rest, when to say yes and when to say no. And that possibility in itself was a form of freedom. In many ways, she was still the same woman. She still took care of things, still organized, still anticipated needs. But now, there was a fundamental difference. She was present in her own life, not just as a function, but as a person. She'd started living inside the house that was her body, her mind, her life, pulling the sheets off the furniture, opening the windows to let in fresh air, switching on small lights in rooms that had been dark. That house still wasn't fully alive. There were still empty spaces, unexplored corners, closed doors. But it wasn't that pristine, lifeless mausoleum anymore. It was starting to show signs of life, revealing imperfections, glimpses of genuine presence, proof that a human being dwelled there. If you know someone who has forgotten their own worth, who has mistaken being useful for being lovable, who carries the world on her shoulders without noticing she's disappearing in the process, maybe this video is the reminder they need. Not so that they'll suddenly change everything, not so that they abandon their responsibilities or sense of duty, but so they start including themselves in the equation. Realize they also deserve the care they so generously give to everyone else. Remember that living fully isn't selfish, it's courageous. Her journey goes on. Every day, she learns and relearns how to balance caring for others with caring for herself, how to tell genuine generosity from self-erasure, how to tell when she's giving out of love and when she's vanishing out of fear. It's an ongoing lesson, full of progress and setbacks, days of clarity and days of fog, moments of total presence and moments of relapse into old habits. But the most important thing is that now she knows. She knows she deserves to take up space. She knows her voice matters. She knows her needs are valid. She knows she can be imperfect, incomplete, in progress, and still worthy of love. Not just other people's love, which she tried so hard to earn through perfection and usefulness, but especially her own love, the love she denied herself for so long. Love that begins with small acts of self-care, small permissions, small acknowledgements of her own humanity, love that transforms an empty house into a home. If this story resonated with you, if it touched that quiet pain you carry, if it named something you felt but couldn't express, and if you want me to keep this conversation going at your own pace, subscribe. I'll only come back if you allow me. This space respects your silence as much as your voice. Which part of this story spoke to you the most? What resonated most strongly? What made you pause and breathe deeply? Write it in the comments. Not for me, but for another woman who might be reading and needs to feel less alone in her experience. There are more stories like this on the channel. Stories of women who carried invisible burdens, who lost themselves while taking care of everyone else, who forgot themselves while remembering everything else. But listen only when your heart calls for it, when you feel ready to look at these truths. Not out of obligation, not because of an algorithm, not from habit, only when your soul needs this mirror, because these stories aren't chasing likes or metrics. They're searching for echoes, for mutual recognition, for that sacred moment when one woman looks at another and says, without words, I see you, I understand, you're not alone. And in that silent understanding, maybe healing begins. Not the kind of healing that solves everything at once, or magically undoes decades of patterns overnight, but the healing that starts with awareness, with naming the pain, with the permission to feel. The healing that happens when we finally realize we're not broken, we're just carrying too much for too long, without enough support. Healing that begins when we gently start setting down the load, not all at once, not dramatically, just a little bit each day, until we can finally stand upright again, looking at the horizon instead of always at the ground, breathing fully instead of just enough to survive, until we can fully inhabit the home that we are, an imperfect home, bearing marks of use and stories in its walls, with messy corners and cluttered drawers, but a home that's alive, inhabited, real. A place where it's safe to exist in every dimension of being, where strength and vulnerability coexist, where caring for others springs from fullness rather than emptiness. A home with open windows, letting in both sun and rain, laughter and tears, pain and joy. A home that's not just functional, but above all, true. And maybe that's the biggest revolution possible. To truly exist in a world that constantly asks us to be less, to take up less space, to keep quiet, to exist not just as a function, but as a presence, not just as usefulness, but as essence, to exist fully, with all our complexities and contradictions, strengths and weaknesses, gifts and limitations. This woman who did everything right and still fell apart is now gathering her fragments, not to return to who she was, perfect outside, empty inside, but to rebuild herself in a new way, more authentic, more present, more real, a reconstruction that's imperfect, full of visible seams and obvious scars, but genuine in every fracture, every patch, every mark of existence. And you, who watched all the way here, maybe you're in your own process of rebuilding. Maybe you're just starting to notice the fractures. Maybe you're still trying to keep it all together, afraid that if you stop running, everything will collapse. Wherever you are on this journey, know you're not alone. Your experience matters. Your pain is valid. Your exhaustion has a reason. And there is a path back home, to yourself. Not a straight, clear, easy path, but a possible one. One step at a time. One small permission at a time. One small act of self-care followed by another. Until one day you realize, I'm here. I'm alive. I'm present. Not just functioning. Not just surviving. Not just serving. But existing. Fully. Truly. Finally. And maybe that's what doing everything right really means. Not outward perfection that breaks us inside, but inward integration that lets us be imperfect on the outside. Not constant usefulness that empties us, but authentic presence that fills us and overflows to others. Not as sacrifice, but as a gift. Not the silencing of our own voice, but tuning it alongside the world's many voices. Not a cacophony, but a harmony. If this story spoke to you, let me continue. In your time, at your pace, with your permission. Until then, care for yourself as you'd care for someone you love deeply, with patience, with kindness, with presence, because you deserve the same care you so generously offer the world.